The winter the bay stopped feeling solid began like any other season on the ice. We trusted the thickness. We always had. My name is Mark Holden. I was 36 that year, with 15 winters behind me on the same frozen inlet off Lake Wyvern. We called it a bay, but it was really a long, narrow bight in the shoreline, sheltered from the main body of the lake by a curved ridge of rock and trees. When the cold came early, the bay froze smooth and thick. No currents, no pressure ridges. It was the place you brought families in February to show them how safe winter water could be. We were not a family group that weekend. We were the ones who came before everyone else. There were 4 of us. Tom was the oldest, broad shoulders, quiet when he wasn't telling you were doing something wrong. He had a thick beard that gathered frost in minutes and eyes that checked the ice the way a mechanic listens to an engine. He'd been fishing that bay before I knew it had a name. Beside him was Evan, my younger brother. He was 30, but the youngest out there. He covered it with jokes, loud ones. He loved new gear and made a point of bringing something different every season just to see if it lived up to the ads. That year, it was the under-ice camera. The last was Richie. Tall, lean, and always cold. He wore more layers than the rest of us and still shivered. He drove plows for the county in winter and worked construction in summer. He didn't talk much about anything that wasn't in front of him. We set up camp on the second weekend of January. The cold had been good to us. Brutal, really. 2 straight weeks where the day never climbed above -10. Nights well below that. The kind of cold that hissed when you drew breath and turned nose hairs into needles. We checked the ice the way we always did. No shortcuts, no assumptions. Tom drilled the first test hole 10 feet from shore, then another 20 feet out, then another. The auger bit into clear blue ice each time, spitting chips that rang when they hit the surface. 12 inches, he said at the first hole. 13 at the second. 14 at the third. He didn't smile, but his shoulders eased. "That's a truck," he said. "We're fine with the sleds." We hauled the gear out on 2 snowmobiles and a sled. Tents, heaters, buckets, the new camera in a hard case that Evan insisted on carrying himself. The bay looked ordinary, dead ordinary. The ice stretched flat and white to the dark line of trees on the far shore. A low ridge of rock framed the mouth where the bay opened into the wider lake. Beyond that was a hazy band of open sky, and, further still, the suggestion of distant hills. The air was so clear it felt empty. No wind, no blowing snow. Just the muted crunch of our boots and the dull scrape of plastic runners on ice. We picked a spot near the center of the bay. Not too close to the inlet, not too close to shore. Tom stomped the surface with his heel a few times, listening. Solid. He nodded once. "Here," he said. "Same line as last year." We pitched 2 pop-up tents, one for fishing, one for sleeping. The overnight tent sat back a little, near where we parked the machines, with a tarp windbreak rigged between a couple of ice screws. The fishing tent sat over the main holes. Dark, insulated walls. No windows. It would be our world once the daylight went. The work was routine. That was the point. Drill holes, scoop slush, set lines. We moved with a practiced rhythm, each of us taking jobs we'd taken 100 times. The ice gave back the familiar noises. A low, distant groan now and then as it adjusted to the cold. Little cracks that sounded like far-off gunshots, traveling in straight lines under the snow. We didn't flinch at those sounds. They were part of the place. Background noise. The air smelled clean. Cold doesn't have much of a scent, but the machines did. Faint gasoline, hot oil, melted snow turning to muddy slush under the engines. There was a dry tang in the air that came off the lake. Mineral. Old. A smell you noticed when the wind shifted, like wet rock buried under the ice. The first odd thing was the birds, or the lack of them. The bay was quiet that morning. Too quiet. Normally, even in deep winter, a few crows hung around the trees at the far end. They watched us. They hopped from branch to branch, waiting for gut piles or dropped scraps. You got used to their calls echoing over the ice. Harsh, irritated, alive. That day, there was nothing. No calls, no wing beats. Just the soft rasp of our clothes when we moved. Evan noticed it first. "Where's our audience?" he asked, nodding toward the tree line. No crows, no gulls, nothing. "Too cold," Richie said. "They're in town eating fries." Tom didn't look up from the hole he was clearing. "They're there," he said. "Probably just not interested in watching four idiots ice fish." He said it like a joke, but he kept glancing toward the trees in a way I didn't usually see. Short looks. Calculated. We brushed it off. You can rationalize a lot when you want the day to feel normal. By late afternoon, we had the camp set. 4 lines in. Stove lit in the sleeping tent. Coffee in a dented steel pot that smelled faintly like every meal we'd ever burned in it. The first hours of fishing were uneventful in the best way. A couple of decent lake trout. One pike that Richie hauled up through the hole in a slow, steady pull. The line hummed in his gloved hands as he worked the fish through the cylinder of dark water. The light outside went from white to gray to the flat blue that comes before full dark. It seeped in under the bottom edge of the tent, turning the ice around our boots into a thin ring of pale glow. Inside, the air warmed just enough to fog the lower edges of our goggles. The heater ticked. Lines creaked softly as the rods flexed with the rhythm of the water below. Evan picked that time to set up his camera. He cleared a new hole near the center of the tent. Smaller. Just wide enough for the cable and the little capsule on the end. The camera itself was a black cylinder with a ring of LED lights around one end. It looked like a flashlight stripped of its handle. "This thing sees everything," he said. "We'll watch the fish come in. Make it a show." Tom grunted. "As long as you're watching the rods and not just your toy." "Relax," Evan said. "We can do both." He lowered the camera sideways through the hole. I watched the cable slide between his gloves, inch by inch, making a soft, wet hiss against the ice as it went down. The monitor sat on a small crate, its screen blank at first, then static. Then the image resolved. Greenish water, floating particles, the blurred edge of the hole above as a halo of light. He tilted the camera with his wrist, slowly, carefully. The water around it was clear, then darker as the angle shifted away from the cone of light from our tent. He sent it deeper. The depth meter in the corner of the screen ticked numbers. 10 feet, 15, 20. "See?" he said. "Bottom's at 23, just like the chart." We took turns glancing at the screen. It was more hypnotic than interesting at first. A small trout drifted into view, curious about the ring of light, then flicked away with a whip of its tail. The bottom showed as pale silt with scattered rocks and the darker shapes of weed clumps lying flat under winter weight. Nothing unusual, nothing wrong. Just the invisible world below our boots made visible for a while. Night settled. Outside, the temperature dropped fast. You could feel it even through the tent fabric. The air grew stiller, heavier. Sound changed quality. It sharpened. Every movement seemed louder against the silence. Somewhere around 8, the first weird vibration came. It wasn't dramatic. If anything, it was almost polite. I felt it in my boots before I heard it. A small, quick tremor under the soles. Not the long, traveling crack of shifting ice. Not the hollow boom of pressure ridges forming out on the main lake. This was a short, tight ripple, like a distant bass note plucked once and allowed to fade. The rods shivered, just a little. Line rings chimed against graphite in a soft, metallic sequence. "Did you feel that?" I asked. Evan looked up from the monitor. "Maybe the ice talking," he said. Tom shook his head. "That's not ice," he said. "Too short, too clean." We listened. Nothing followed. The heater ticked again as it kicked to a higher setting. Outside, something, maybe a snowmobile on the far shore, faded under the weight of distance. The moment passed. We went back to watching the lines. The ordinary had returned, or pretended to. Half an hour later, the power went. It wasn't a full failure, not at first. The light inside the tent dimmed, then brightened, then dimmed again, like someone was playing with a dimmer switch we didn't have. The heater's flames sputtered in a soft blue flutter before settling back. The monitor flickered to black, then came back with the camera feed, then went to a gray wash of static. "Hey," Evan said, tapping the side with 2 fingers. No, don't start this now." "Battery?" I asked. He checked the pack. "Full," he said. It was running 5 minutes. The line of LED lights on the camera housing flickered on the screen. On, off, on again. Each time, the field of murky water lit and then vanished. The ice under us gave another of those short, tight tremors. Stronger this time. I felt it in my knees. A little push upward, then down. The tent walls barely moved, but the rods did. They bounced gently in their holders as if something below had given the ice a quick, decisive shove. "That's not air pockets," Tom said. "Nothing's warming up enough to pop." Richie rubbed his gloved hands together. "Maybe we're sitting over a spring," he said. "Groundwater moving. Pressure changes." "There's no spring mapped in this bay," Tom said. "There's a lot not mapped," Richie replied, but his voice didn't carry much conviction. The lights steadied again. The heater stayed on. The monitor flickered once more, then caught and held. The camera image swam into focus. Green water, faint particles, the same silt, the same scattered rocks. "See," Evan said, "just crappy connections. It's a new rig, doesn't like the cold yet." The explanation fit just well enough to sit with. We let it. The next hour passed in small talk and long silences. We caught one more fish, a thin pike with pale eyes and old scars that looked oddly straight across its flank, as if something had once clamped down and then lost interest. The fish thrashed weakly in the air, then went still on the ice, its body steaming in the tense, mild warmth. The bay outside stayed silent. No crows, no owls, no distant engines. Just the occasional normal creak of ice near shore. It was close to 10 when we saw the shadow. Evan had left the camera pointed out across the center of the bay, in line with where our tent sat. The angle showed a broad sweep of midwater, empty, featureless. We watched it the way you watch a fire, not expecting anything specific, just letting the movement fill time. I was the one looking at the screen when the dark shape slid into the edge of the frame. It was subtle, just a shade darker than the water around it. At first, my brain tried to turn it into ordinary things. A clump of weed broken loose and drifting. A cloud of silt stirred by some slow, unseen current. The angle and the greenish light made it hard to judge. But the shape didn't behave like debris. It held together. It moved in a steady, unbroken line from left to right. Smooth. No stutter, no tumble. The size was the thing that didn't compute. We knew the scale. We knew the distance. The camera hung a few feet above the bottom, angled slightly upward. Anything passing at that depth, that far from the lens, should have been small. A normal fish, even a big pike, would show as a brief flash, a quick bar of movement. This shadow filled a third of the screen, maybe more. It wasn't close to the camera. You could tell by the way the floating particles drifted in front of it. Tiny specks, little threads of something organic. They slid past, between the lens and whatever moved behind them. "How big is that?" I asked, my voice low without intending it. Evan leaned in. "Probably closer than it looks," he said, but his tone had changed. Less sure. Thinner. Tom stepped closer, tipping his head to get the glare off the screen. His breath smelled like coffee and the fried sausage we'd eaten earlier, faint and greasy in the warmer air of the tent. "That's at least 15 feet out," he said. "Maybe 20. The shadow kept moving, steady, unhurried. It had no clear edges, no fins, no tail, just a long, tapering darkness, thicker in the front, narrowing toward the rear. It gave the impression of mass without offering anything to grab onto. No pattern, no scales, no eye glint. "Could be a school," Richie said. "Fish packed tight." "Name me a school in a frozen bay in January that big," Tom said, not looking away. No one did. The shadow slid out of frame. Gone. The camera showed empty water again. Particles drifted. Nothing moved. We waited. I don't know what we expected. A second pass? A closer look? A return? Some confirmation that our brains would let us classify. Nothing came back. The screen was just water. "Replay?" I asked. Evan shook his head. "Not recording," he said. "I was just watching. I didn't think—" He cut off. The admission hung in the air like something we could taste. Regret, frustration, a little fear. Tom straightened. "Could be a sturgeon," he said. "A big one. There are stories from the main lake." "Not in here," Richie said. "The bay's cut off half the year." "Things move in when the water's high," Tom replied. "You've seen the channels." The explanation was flimsy, and we all knew it. But it was something. We grabbed it. We stepped back from the monitor one by one. We checked lines. We talked about lures and bait sizes and last season's catches. We didn't talk about the shadow. Not directly. An hour later, we left the fishing tent for the night. It was colder outside than it had been when we arrived. The air hit my lungs like a handful of needles. It smelled sharper. The clean bite of ice mixed with something else now. Something metallic and faintly earthy, like wet iron buried under frozen ground. The snow around the tents squeaked under our boots. High pitch, glassy. The kind of sound you get when the temperature drops below a point that makes most people stay home. We zipped the fishing tent and crossed the short stretch of open ice to the sleeping shelter. The sky above was clear, hard stars. A thin smear of cloud far to the north. No wind. The bay looked like a painting. Still, flat, controlled. We crawled into sleeping bags with our base layers still on. The little catalytic heater in the corner gave off a soft, steady hiss and a faint smell of burned dust and old fuel. Condensation formed along the inside seams of the tent, tiny beads that caught light when we moved headlamps. Richie killed the lantern first, then Evan, then Tom. Dark settled fast. The only sound was the soft tick of cooling metal on the stove and the muffled crack of ice somewhere out beyond the tents. I was almost asleep when the ice began to move. It started as a sensation more than a sound. A subtle, rolling lift that passed under my sleeping bag, then returned from another angle. Not a shake, not a sharp jolt. More like the long, slow swell of water under a boat. The tent floor rose half an inch. Sank. Rose again. "Anyone else feel that?" I called. Tom's voice came from the dark. "Yeah." Richie shifted in his bag. The nylon rustled. "That's not wind. There is no wind." Evan unzipped his bag halfway, the teeth rasping too loud in the close space. "That's weird," he said. "Maybe a truck on the road?" "The road's a mile away," Tom said. The movement came again, a long, slow ripple. This time there was sound, a deep, low groan that seemed to come from below us, not across the bay. It wasn't the brittle crack of ice under sudden stress. We knew that sound. We'd heard sheets separate and slam into each other out on the main lake when the weather flipped. That was sharp, violent. This was soft and heavy, a pressure noise. The tent walls didn't move, but the sleeping bags did. We shifted slightly toward the center as the ice under one side of the shelter rose just enough to change our balance. Then it eased back. Richie cursed under his breath. "This isn't right," he said. "Ice doesn't wave like that." Tom unzipped his bag and sat up. The floor rustled under him. "Stay put," he said. "I'm going to check." He pulled on his jacket, boots, and hat in quick, practiced motions. The air he let in felt even colder than before, a knife edge of outside cutting through the residual warmth. He unzipped the tent flap and stepped out. The cold rushed in. For a moment, all I could hear was the change in air, the gentle flap of fabric, the distant, hollow quality of open space. Then the low sound came again. Not under us this time, further out. A drawn-out, bass-heavy rumble, like a truck rolling by beneath the ice instead of on top. I unzipped my bag too. So did Evan. We stepped out into the night after Tom, boots crunching on the bare ice that extended 2 feet beyond the edge of the sleeping tent. The bay was still. No visible waves, no fractures, no ridges. Just a broad, flat sheet of pale ice under starlight. The fishing tent sat 15 yards away, a dark lump on the white. Our sleds and machines were parked near it, faintly rimed with frost. The sound came again. I felt it in my chest more than in my ears, a deep, rolling vibration that pressed inward. For a second, it made my breath hitch, as if some invisible hand had given my ribcage a quick, insistent squeeze. "What the hell is that?" Evan whispered. Tom shook his head slowly. His breath came out in pale steam that hung low before disappearing. "Could be ice shifting on old cracks," he said. "We've had warm days, cold nights." "It's -20, Richie said, stepping out behind us. "There's no warm anything." We stood there, 4 men on a frozen bay, listening to the solid ground under us act like something that remembered it had once been water. The ice rose again under my boots. Barely, an inch at most. Not enough to throw me off balance, enough to feel my weight change. It moved in a straight line, a slow, passing bulge that traveled from the direction of the mouth of the bay toward the far shore, like a swell rolling under a sheet. We watched it go. The movement was subtle, but visible if you looked at the edge of light and shadow. The reflected starlight shivered in a shallow wave. Our sleds creaked as their runners adjusted. When the bulge reached the shallows near shore, it faded. "Water moving under the ice?" I asked. "Not this thick," Tom said, "and not like that." We stared out toward the dark gap where the bay met the lake proper. The ridgeline there looked different in the starlight than it did in day. Lower, flatter. The space beyond felt occupied. Not by anything we could see, just by possibility. The vibration faded. The ice went still. The quiet that followed was almost worse. "Back in," Tom said. "If it was going to break, it would have done it." His words were meant to reassure. They mostly bounced off the unease building in my chest. We went back into the tent, zipped the flap, crawled into bags. The heater hissed softly. The floor felt stable again. Solid. No more swells. Sleep took longer that time. My mind kept replaying the movement, the way the ice had risen in a smooth, single hump. Not random, not scattered. Focused. At some point, I drifted off. I woke to Evan shaking my shoulder. "Mark," he hissed. "Wake up. You need to see this." The tent was still dark, but his headlamp threw a cone of pale light around us. Tom and Richie were already sitting up. The air felt colder, even with the heater still going. The little flame looked smaller, weaker. The hiss was uneven. "What time is it?" I asked. "Just after 2, Evan said. "The power's acting weird, and the camera—" He didn't finish. He just gestured to the flap. We stepped out into a night that felt sharper than before. The stars seemed higher, colder. The horizon line was barely visible, a faint suggestion of black trees against a blacker sky. The fishing tent's walls pulsed faintly, light flickering inside. "Left the lantern low," Richie said. "Didn't want to freeze the holes." "It's not the lantern," Evan said. "It's the monitor. The whole thing keeps cutting." We crossed the ice between tents. The surface under our boots felt different now, harder. The squeak had gone thin and brittle, as if the cold had shaved off another layer of tolerance. Inside the fishing tent, the air was both warmer and more sour, a mix of propane, fish, and damp wool. The smell clung to the back of my throat. The monitor sat where we'd left it. The cable still ran down through the camera hole, dark and wet where it met the ice. The screen flickered between static and image, as if someone outside the tent were pinching and releasing a cord. When the image held, we saw water. When it failed, the sound of white noise filled the space, too loud in the confined air. Richie turned the lantern up a notch. The flame flared, then steadied. Shadows along the tent walls jumped, then settled. "Watch," Evan said. He tapped the side of the monitor with 2 fingers. It cleared for a moment, then scrambled. The depth reading in the corner flashed numbers: 23, 0, 13, then back again. The camera's LED ring flickered in the feed, a soft, ghostly glow that lit particles and little nothing shapes. Then the picture steadied. The water looked different now, darker, thicker. The particles weren't drifting, they were trembling. "Is that current?" I asked. "There is no current," Tom said. "Not down there, not like that." The trembling wasn't a flow. It didn't carry the particles in a direction. It shivered them, back and forth, tiny oscillations that made my eyes ache if I stared too long. Then the camera shook. Not a little, not like someone tugged the cable. The view lurched sideways in a slow lean and then swung back, as if the entire volume of water had shifted around it. The ice under our boots gave one of those long, slow waves in response. The tent floor rose, then dropped. The rods clacked in their holders as line guides rang again. Richie grabbed the center pole. "Okay," he said. "That's enough." On the screen, the light from the camera ring flared across something smooth and dark that slid past just at the edge of the beam. No details, no ridges, just a suggestion of curvature, the way light behaves when it hits something solid. "How far out is that?" I whispered. Evan swallowed. "I don't know," he said. "The focus is off. It's far and close at the same time." The image jittered, then steadied again. For a moment, nothing moved but the trembling particles. Then, at the far limit of the camera's reach, 2 points appeared. They were faint at first, dim, just slightly darker than the water around them. Then they caught the glow of the LED ring, not directly, but in a flat, absorbing way. They were not bright, they were the opposite. Small circles where the light seemed to go in and not come back out. It took a second for my brain to label them. Eyes. Set too far apart for any fish I'd ever seen. Too level, too calm. They did not flash, they did not blink. They just existed. A fixed, paired absence. The camera didn't move. The eyes did. They drifted, slowly, from the edge of the frame toward the center. Not with the careless, slicing motion of a predator fish, with something else. Something that felt like deliberate approach. My chest tightened, not metaphorically. A band of pressure cinched just under my ribs, squeezing up toward my throat in a slow, insistent arc. It matched the same deep vibration in the ice earlier, like my body was an instrument being tuned to someone else's note. "Turn it off," Richie said. "No," Tom said quietly. Not yet. The eyes came closer. As they did, the rest of the shape remained hidden. The water around them stayed dark. No clear outline, no nose, no mouth. Just those two spots where light went to die. They didn't grow larger in a way that made sense. The perspective was wrong. They seemed to change distance without crossing the space between. The camera flickered, static, then image. The eyes were gone. The field of view showed only water again. Trembling particles, nothing else. My shoulders slumped. I hadn't realized how tight they'd been. Loose connection, Evan said. His voice broke in the middle of the words. Nobody kicks the stand, Tom said. Nobody touches that cable. He stepped closer to the hole. Frost creaked under his boots. The smell of cold water drifted up. It was subtle but distinct. Mineral. Heavy. Older than the propane tang and the fish stink. The ice under us hummed. There's no other word for it. A deep, low vibration ran through the floor. It felt like standing on a metal bridge when a heavy truck passes under. A muffled, continuous note that traveled up through our boots into our legs. The rods shook. One tip dipped sharply, then sprang back. The line hummed against the guides in a thin, drawn-out whine. We scrambled to grab them, hands clumsy in gloves. Is that a hit? Evan asked. No, Tom said. That's something else. The vibration rose, not in volume, in pitch, just slightly, enough to set my teeth on edge. The monitor flared white, static, then black, then the green-gray of water again. The depth reading flashed nonsense for a few seconds before settling back on 23. The eyes were closer this time. No transition, no approach. One moment, the camera showed empty water. The next, those same twin voids filled the center of the frame. So close that the faint spill of light from the LED ring showed a narrow band of darkness around them. Smooth, featureless, like wet stone, or skin stretched tight over something immobile. The pressure in my chest spiked, up into my throat, into my jaw. I couldn't breathe for a second. The air in the tent tasted metallic, a faint iron tang, as if the cold itself had sharpened into something like blood. The eyes did nothing. They didn't widen, they didn't narrow, they just existed on the screen, drinking in everything the camera offered. It sees the light, Richie said, voice flat. It doesn't care, Tom replied. The monitor flickered again. When the image cleared, the eyes were gone. The water looked normal. The trembling particles slowed. The depth reading held steady. The vibration stopped. Silence fell hard. No hum, no static, just our breathing and the faint tick of cooling metal on the heater. For the record, Evan said quietly, I hate this. We killed the monitor. It felt like a retreat, like closing curtains on a window when you know something is still standing outside. But there was only so much we could watch without feeling something inside begin to fray. We unplugged the camera, pulled cable up hand over hand. The line came out clean and damp, cold burning the fabric of our gloves where it brushed. No snags, no damage. The little cylinder emerged from the hole with a soft suck of parted water. It looked the same as when it went in. Black. Featureless. We stowed it in the case. We didn't talk about bringing it out again. Back in the sleeping tent, none of us lay down right away. We sat on our bags, boots on, jackets still on. The heater hummed. The air felt thin, as if the cold outside had slipped in through gaps we couldn't see. Richie finally broke the quiet. You know what this sounds like? He said. Don't, Evan replied. Just don't. Stories, Richie said anyway. From the main lake, the old guys at the bar. Things that live deep. Things that don't like noise in their house. This bay is 23 feet, Tom said. That's not deep. Deep enough for something if there's a hole under it, Richie said. A pocket, a drop. We went back and forth like that for a while. Rational explanations, irrational ones. Maps, springs. old river channels buried under sediment. Every explanation felt like a thin coat of paint over something we did not want to look at directly. Sometime after 4, we finally lay down again. We didn't unlace boots. We didn't fully zip bags. Sleep came in short drops, 10 minutes here, 20 there. Every little creak brought me back to full awareness. Just before dawn, the ice moved again. It started with the now familiar swell under the tent, a slow rise and fall, then another, closer. The air inside shifted too. The heater's flame leaned slightly without any help from wind. Then the sound came. Not the heavy hum from before, a new one. A long, drawn-out scrape, faint but clear, running from somewhere near the mouth of the bay toward our position. It had the quality of something large brushing under the ice. Not claws, not metal. More like the broadside of a body moving along a surface. The tent floor lifted, dropped. The movement didn't stop under us this time. It kept going, past, toward the shallows. We scrambled out of the tent, half-dressed. The sky outside was finally changing. A thin band of pale color touched the horizon. The stars above had faded to weaker points. The bay looked unchanged. But it wasn't. Far out, near the center line between us and the far shore, the ice was moving. You could see it now. A gentle, rolling bulge traveled along its length. Not sharp enough to crack, not high enough to break the surface. Just a visible wave, like someone pushing up from underneath with the heel of a hand. It came toward us, angled slightly from the mouth. Our sleds rocked as it reached them. The hoods lifted an inch, then dropped. The parked machines creaked softly as their frames adjusted. The wave passed under our feet a moment later. My boots rose, then settled. The motion was smooth, controlled. It didn't feel random. It felt like a test. The bulge kept going, toward the shallows. When it reached the shore, it faded again. The trees there stood silent. No birds, no movement. "Pack up," Tom said. His voice was steady, but his jaw worked against the words. "We're not staying another night." "Now?" Evan asked. "We can't move in the dark." "It's not dark anymore," Tom said, "and we're not waiting to see what it does when the sun's fully up." No one argued. We broke camp in a rush that never quite became panic. Tents came down, stakes pulled, gear stowed in sleds. The routine was the same as always, but the cadence had changed. Faster, tighter. Our hands shook more than the cold could account for. As we worked, the ice under us moved twice more. Smaller bulges, one near the mouth, one near the center. Each time, the motion felt less like a shift and more like a sweep, back and forth, covering ground. We didn't put the camera back in the water. We didn't need to see it again. By the time the sun broke the horizon proper, the machines were loaded. Exhaust plumed white in the growing light. The smell of gasoline and hot metal filled the bay, familiar and grounding and suddenly precious. Tom took the lead. I followed on the second machine. Evan and Richie sat on the sleds, holding gear in place with gloved hands. No one wanted anything bouncing off and forcing us to stop. We eased the throttles. We didn't gun it. Fast would have meant risk. Cracks. Hidden slush pockets. Slow meant staying on the surface and not giving whatever was below us more chances to react. The ice under the runners felt solid enough, hard. We rolled toward the little path we had worn coming in the day before. Halfway to shore, the vibration returned. It came up through the machines, through the seats, into our legs. A deep, steady note that set the handlebars trembling. The surface ahead bulged again, higher this time. The wave traveled not across our path, but along it. The crest moved parallel to us, pacing the machines, staying just ahead of our front skis. "Keep going," Tom yelled over the engines. The wave angled in, closer. For a second, our machine tilted toward it. The front left ski rose higher than the right. The runners on the sled scraped the ice in a higher pitch. The bulge dropped away just before it could clip us. The sensation that followed was strange, almost worse than a direct impact. It felt like a choice. We reached the shore without the ice breaking, climbed up the trampled snowbank where we had first drilled our test holes. The machine's tracks bit into frozen dirt and old roots. Solid ground felt wrong under the skis. Too rough, too loud. We didn't stop until the bay was behind us and the trees of the access path swallowed sightlines. Only then did Tom kill his engine. I shut mine off a moment later. The sudden absence of mechanical noise made my ears ring. The bay lay behind us, flat, white, still. No visible waves, no cracks. Just a broad, unbroken sheet of ice that, from a distance, looked as safe as it ever had. We stood there between the trees for a long minute. No one spoke. Our breath hung in front of us, then drifted away in thin clouds. "Tell anyone," Evan said finally, "and they're going to say we spooked ourselves with a camera and bad coffee." "They'd be half right," Richie said. Tom looked out at the bay one last time. His eyes followed the line from shore to center to the mouth and out into the wider lake beyond. "We don't come back this season," he said. "What about the gear marks?" I asked. "People will know we were out here. They'll ask why we're not—" "Let them ask," he said. "We'll tell them the ice talked too much this year." We rode back to town in a cold that felt different now. The wind on the trail had teeth. The trees lining the path seemed taller, closer. Every shadow looked like something stepped half out of place. We could have left it there. We should have. A strange weekend. A story to half-tell over beers, with the worst parts turned into jokes. But people keep records. People check things. 2 weeks later, the local paper ran a small story on page 3. No pictures, just a column of text that most folks skipped. Unseasonal ice damage in a sheltered bay on Lake Wyvern. Likely cause, unexplained under-ice movement. Warning to avoid the area until further notice. A photo went around our phones anyway. Somebody from the county had taken it before the notice went up. It showed the bay from above, drone shot. You could see the fractures spiderwebbing out from the center. Long, curved lines that didn't look like normal pressure cracks. They were too smooth, too deliberate. The pattern reminded me of circles in water after something large surfaces, then sinks. In the middle of those lines, near where our tent had been, the ice was darker. Not open, not broken, just a different shade. Evan zoomed in on his screen. He sent the image to all of us with a single message. Same place, same depth. We didn't answer. There are still no official notes about deep pockets under that bay. No new springs mapped, no explanation given beyond shifting ice and unusual freeze-thaw cycles. But when winter comes now and the cold snaps hard, you can stand at the edge of the trees above the bay and listen. Sometimes, if the air is still enough, you can feel a faint pressure in your chest, a slow, deep hum that doesn't match the cracks you hear. The ice looks solid. It always will. The thing underneath knows that too.